Right now, as you are listening to the sound of my voice, you are actively participating in a massive, invisible, and highly orchestrated biological game that is actively keeping you poor, and you probably do not even realize you are playing it because you are completely surrounded by people who genuinely love you and who truly believe that they want the absolute best for your future. But if you actually take a painful, objective step back and look closely at their daily habits, their actual bank accounts, and the specific way they talk about money when they are stressed, you will realize a truly terrifying and deeply uncomfortable truth. The vast majority of the population is completely and hopelessly broke, trapped in a highly engineered modern financial matrix of endless consumer debt and stagnant wages, and because misery biologically requires company, they are actively and subconsciously trying to ensure that you stay exactly as broke, trapped, and exhausted as they are so they do not have to feel alone in their financial failure. Warren Buffett, who is undeniably one of the wealthiest and most ruthlessly brilliant capital allocators in the entire history of human civilization, has a very famous and unforgiving rule about wealth that most people completely ignore at their own peril, stating that you will inevitably and unavoidably move in the exact direction of the specific people that you associate with, meaning that if you associate with people who are operating at a massive, world-changing level, you will naturally rise to meet their elite standards, but if you surround yourself with people who have completely accepted financial mediocrity and massive credit card debt as a normal way of life, you are mathematically and biologically guaranteed to fail. Today, on Pratibodh Wisedom, we are going to dive incredibly deep into the darkest, most emotionally difficult, and most scientifically profound psychological barrier to building generational wealth, known by sociologists as the crab bucket effect, and we are going to break down exactly how your current physical and social environment is acting like an invisible, suffocating gravitational force that is keeping you permanently trapped. Chapter 1: The Ancient Science of the Herd. To truly understand exactly why you are currently struggling to break out of your financial situation and why it feels so incredibly, physically painful to change your life, you first have to understand the hard, undeniable biological science of how human beings actually operate on a neurological level. Because in the modern world, we like to flatter ourselves and think of ourselves as highly independent, purely logical creatures who make our own rational decisions. But the brutal truth is that we are actually incredibly complex, highly evolved mimicking machines driven by ancient survival code. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, when our ancestors were wandering the dangerous, unforgiving African savanna, being separated from the tribe or being kicked out of the group meant absolute, guaranteed death by starvation or apex predators, so our brains rapidly evolved a powerful, overriding biological defense mechanism to ensure we never, ever got kicked out of the group, developing a highly complex system of mirror neurons that literally force you to subconsciously copy the exact behavior, the daily language, the spending habits, and the core financial mindset of the specific tribe you spend the most physical time with. This terrifying phenomenon was famously proven by the Solomon-Asch conformity experiments in the 1950s, where scientists proved that human beings will literally look at an objective, undeniable fact right in front of their own eyes and actively choose to lie about it just so they do not contradict the rest of the group, proving that your brain values social conformity significantly more than it values the actual truth. This means that the famous saying that you are the exact average of your 5 closest friends is not just a catchy, motivational self-help quote that sounds good on a poster. It is a scientifically proven biological and neurological reality that absolutely dictates your entire financial future. Because if your 5 best friends are constantly complaining about how the economy is unfair and how the system is rigged, your mirror neurons will force you to adopt that exact same paralyzing victim mindset just to fit into the conversation and avoid being rejected by the modern tribe. Chapter 2: The Omaha Advantage and the Architecture of Isolation. Warren Buffett completely understood this terrifying biological trap decades ago when he was just a young man starting to build his massive investment empire, which is exactly why he made the highly controversial, deeply misunderstood, and utterly brilliant decision to live in Omaha, Nebraska, thousands of miles away from the manic, toxic, hyper-competitive noise of Wall Street in New York City. He deeply understood that Wall Street was a massive, chaotic bucket full of panicked day traders, greedy hedge fund managers, and short-term thinkers who were constantly chasing the next shiny object, reading the exact same financial newspapers and screaming at each other over the latest stock market rumor, and Buffett knew with absolute certainty that if he physically placed himself in that highly contagious environment, his own mirror neurons would eventually betray him and force him to make the exact same stupid, impatient, emotion-driven mistakes as everyone else in the city. By intentionally and physically isolating himself in the quiet, boring, slow-paced agricultural environment of Omaha, he completely insulated his mind from the toxic social gravity of the global financial world, allowing him to sit quietly in his modest office reading boring corporate reports for 8 uninterrupted hours a day, thinking completely independently and making highly rational long-term investments while the rest of the world was panicking and burning their capital in real time. He conclusively proved to the entire world that protecting your psychological environment is the absolute first and most critical step to protecting your financial capital, because true, generational wealth is not built in the loud, chaotic chaotic dopamine-fueled echo chambers of social media or crowded networking events. It is built in the absolute, uninterrupted silence of deep focus, meaning if you truly want to invest and build wealth like Warren Buffett, you do not just need to blindly copy his stock picks, you need to ruthlessly copy his environmental design and aggressively distance yourself from the paralyzing noise of the broke majority. Chapter 3. The Anatomy of the Crab Bucket. This deep, unshakable biological need to fit in and conform brings us to the absolute most dangerous and toxic social phenomenon in the modern world, which sociologists and psychologists refer to as the crab bucket effect, and it perfectly and tragically explains why trying to escape poverty and build a successful business from scratch often feels like you are fighting a brutal, exhausting, completely unwinnable war against the very people you love and care about the most. If you are ever walking alone on a beach and you catch a single crab and put it into a smooth plastic bucket, that solo crab will easily and quickly reach up, grab the rim with its claws, and pull itself up to completely escape and find its absolute freedom in the vast ocean. But if you catch 10 crabs and put them all into that exact same plastic bucket, and one ambitious crab attempts to climb out toward the light and escape the trap, a deeply terrifying and highly revealing psychological thing happens. The other 9 crabs at the bottom will absolutely not cheer for the escaping crab. They will not watch and learn its climbing technique so they can follow, and they will certainly not offer a claw to help it up. They will actually reach up, violently grab the escaping crab by its fragile legs with their heavy claws, and actively, aggressively drag it back down into the dark, crushing, miserable pile at the bottom of the bucket, ensuring that absolutely nobody escapes and that they all suffer the exact same terrible fate together. Human beings do the exact same thing when it comes to money, career advancement, and personal development, and they do not do this because they are inherently evil or malicious villains who actively want to see you starve. They do it because your sudden ambition, your relentless discipline, and your loud, visible desire to build generational wealth makes them feel incredibly unsafe, deeply insecure, and painfully aware of their own life choices. Chapter 4. The Teenage Crab and the Biological Fear of Missing Out. To truly understand how insidious and universal this trap is, you have to realize that the crab bucket does not care how old you are. It begins aggressively pulling at your ankles from the moment you are old enough to understand what money is, effectively trapping millions of teenagers before their adult lives have even officially started. Imagine a 16-year-old kid who suddenly wakes up and realizes he does not want to work a minimum wage job for the rest of his life. So instead of spending his Friday nights mindlessly playing video games for 6 hours straight, or desperately trying to buy expensive, heavily branded designer sneakers just to impress kids at school who do not even care about him, he decides to stay in his bedroom and spend his entire weekend learning how to write complex software code or learning the psychology of digital marketing. He is making a massive, mature, exponential move for his future, but the absolute second his friend group finds out that he is reading business books instead of playing the new video game, the claws of the teenage crab bucket will immediately reach up and try to drag him back down into the dirt. His friends will relentlessly mock him in group chats. They will call him a tryhard or a loser who takes life too seriously. And they will use intense, agonizing social pressure and the devastating biological fear of missing out to convince him that his teenage years are supposed to be wasted on cheap dopamine and meaningless entertainment, telling him that he has his whole life to worry about money later. This is the exact moment where 99% of young adults surrender their ultimate potential, because the neurological pain of being outcasted by the high school tribe triggers the exact same pain receptors in the brain as physical injury, meaning the ambitious teenager will literally close his laptop, abandon his coding course, and jump right back into the video game lobby just to stop the mockery, completely unaware that he just allowed a group of broke 16-year-olds to successfully dictate his financial destiny and permanently trap him in the cycle of the working class. Chapter 5. The Corporate Crab and the Illusion of Success. If you somehow manage to survive the teenage bucket with your ambition intact, you are immediately thrown into an even more dangerous, sophisticated, and vastly more expensive trap the moment you enter the workforce, which is the adult corporate crab bucket, where the chains holding you down are no longer made of high school peer pressure. They are made of 30-year mortgages, terrifying car payments, and the toxic, hyper-competitive culture of the modern American workplace. Imagine a 35-year-old man who works in a standard corporate office making a decent middle-class salary, but he looks at his life and realizes he is completely suffocating under $80,000 of consumer debt. So he experiences a massive financial awakening and decides to take absolute, extreme ownership of his reality by doing the hardest thing a modern adult can do, selling his beautiful, heavily financed luxury SUV that he was paying $900 a month for so he can buy an ugly 10-year-old, scratched-up Honda Civic with straight cash, and aggressively funneling every single spare penny he earns into a low-cost index fund to literally buy back his freedom. He is making the absolute most brilliant, mathematically sound decision of his entire adult life, but the very next morning when he pulls that ugly, scratched-up Honda Civic into the corporate parking lot, the adult crabs in his office will absolutely lose their minds and begin violently tearing him down, looking at his old car and his homemade packed lunch and brutally judging him, making passive-aggressive jokes by the water cooler, asking him if he is going bankrupt and telling him that you only live once and that he needs to treat himself because he works so hard. They will actively try to shame him into going back into massive debt because seeing him make a massive sacrifice for his long-term freedom shines a blinding, terrifying spotlight on their own horrific financial mistakes, and because they simply cannot stomach the undeniable mathematical fact that he is going to be able to retire a full decade before they do, they will use psychological shame to try and drag him back into the dealership to buy a car he doesn't need, proving that in the adult world, the crabs use the powerful illusion of status as their primary weapon to ensure you stay chained to your cubicle forever. Chapter 6. The Generational Crab and the Sunset Trap. And if you naively think that you eventually age out of the crab bucket and that getting older naturally brings financial wisdom and peace from social pressure, you are completely ignoring the most tragic and heartbreaking trap of them all, which is the generational bucket that violently captures people in their 60s and 70s who are approaching the sunset of their lives without a proper financial fortress. Imagine a 65-year-old woman who looks at her meager retirement savings and realizes that global inflation is going to completely devour her purchasing power before she dies, so instead of just giving up and accepting a life of poverty, she decides to leverage the modern internet, dedicating her early mornings to learning how to start a highly profitable, scalable e-commerce consulting business, or a digital newsletter using the 4 decades of industry expertise she built up over her entire career. She is attempting a beautiful, empowering pivot to secure her legacy and protect her family tree, but when she sits down for coffee with her friends of 40 years to excitedly tell them about her new digital business venture, the oldest and most bitter crabs in the bucket will immediately strike with devastating, dream-crushing force, looking at her like she is completely insane, telling her that the internet is just a scam for young people, warning her that she is going to lose all her retirement money, and constantly repeating the comforting, paralyzing lie that the entire global economy is rigged against seniors, so there is absolutely no point in trying anything new. They will project all of their own deep, unhealed regrets, their lifelong fears, and their massive financial insecurities directly onto her ambitious project, desperately trying to pull her back down to the coffee table so they can all mutually complain about the cost of groceries and the state of the world together, because watching someone in their 60s actually succeed and build new wealth completely destroys the final comforting excuse that it is simply too late to change your life, proving that social gravity has absolutely no expiration date, and whether you are 16, 35, or 65, there will always be a bucket of terrified people waiting to pull you down. Chapter 7. The Poison of the Comforting Lie. When you finally wake up from the financial matrix and start making these massive life changes, the crabs in your bucket will immediately start pulling at your ankles using a highly specific, deeply manipulative psychological vocabulary, and they will say things like, "Why are you grinding so hard, man? You just need to relax and live a little because you cannot take money to the grave." Or they will hit you with the ultimate toxic excuse, saying that the entire economic system is rigged by the billionaires and the politicians anyway, so why are you even bothering to try? You have to listen to me very carefully right now and burn this into your mind, because that specific language is the exact sound of social gravity. It is the sound of the crabs violently pulling you back down into the mud, and if you listen to them and give in to the peer pressure to stay comfortable, you will permanently stay in that dark bucket until the day you die, because poverty is very often a shared culture, a comfortable collective narrative of pure victimhood where everyone agrees that the government is corrupt and the rich are all evil, and believing this shared story is incredibly comforting to the broke mind because it completely absolves them of any personal responsibility to actually fix their miserable lives. Warren Buffett actively warns against this exact mindset, teaching that you must completely ignore the macroeconomic complaining of the masses and focus purely on your own circle of competence, because while the crabs are busy blaming the ocean for being too cold, the wealthy are busy building a stronger boat, meaning if you want to be rich, you must violently reject the comforting lies of the poor. Chapter 8. The Agony of Ruthless Isolation. So how do you actually break this invisible biological loop and sever the heavy chains of social gravity to successfully escape the bucket without completely destroying your entire life and losing your mind? Because the brutal truth that no fake internet guru wants to tell you is that escaping requires a phase of ruthless, agonizing, extended isolation that most normal human beings are simply too weak to endure. I am absolutely not telling you that you have to be cruel to your family or that you have to scream at your childhood friends and dramatically burn every single bridge you have ever built, but you absolutely must protect your mind, your attention, and your energy like it is a sacred fortress under heavy, relentless siege, because you simply cannot afford to sit around on a Tuesday afternoon for 3 hours listening to someone bitterly complain about how unfair their boss is and how terrible their life is while they actively do absolutely nothing to change it. That negative, victim-based energy is literal poison to your future net worth. It is a highly contagious virus that infects your subconscious mind, and if you want to reach the escape velocity required to permanently break out of the middle class, you have to willingly go through the incredibly painful, isolating, lonely process of outgrowing your environment, which means you are going to have to look the people you love in the eye and say no a lot. You are going to spend a lot of Friday nights completely alone in your room, sitting in silence, working on your business, meticulously reading financial statements, learning how to invest, and stacking your high-income skills while everyone else your age is out partying, seeking cheap dopamine hits, and going further into high-interest credit card debt just to impress strangers they do not even like. This specific phase of the journey feels like pure psychological torture because your ancient lizard brain is screaming at you that you are being rejected by the tribe and that you are going to die alone in the wilderness. But you have to look yourself in the mirror during those dark moments and remind yourself that you are not actually losing friends. You are actually just shedding the dead weight of the crabs who are actively trying to drown you, intentionally emptying your life to make room for the high-level people who will actually help you build your empire. Chapter 9. Building the Ultimate Virtual Neighborhood. Now, you might be sitting there listening to this harsh reality and saying to yourself that you are completely broke right now. You live in a terrible neighborhood, you have a terrible job, and highly successful, wealthy people absolutely do not want to hang out with you or mentor someone who has absolutely nothing to offer them. And if you think that, you are completely 100% right, because you cannot just casually walk into an elite country club or stroll into a Wall Street boardroom and demand that a self-made billionaire takes time out of their busy day to teach you how to get rich. But you have an unfair advantage that no other generation in history has ever had, because you live in the absolute greatest, most technologically connected era in the entire history of human civilization. You live in the age of the internet, meaning you absolutely do not need physical proximity to brilliance to completely change your life. You can actually build a massive, elite, world-class virtual neighborhood right inside your own mind through your glowing screen. You can spend 3 uninterrupted hours every single day hanging out with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger by aggressively consuming their annual Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meetings on YouTube. You can spend your morning commute listening to the greatest, most ruthless, most successful minds in the history of capitalism break down their exact, step-by-step frameworks for success on high-level podcasts. And you can read the detailed biographies of self-made titans like Steve Jobs, Andrew Carnegie, and John D. Rockefeller until their brilliant thought patterns literally become your own. When you read a profound book written by a billionaire or listen to a high-level interview, you are not just passing time, you are literally downloading their superior mental operating system straight into your own brain, strategically and intentionally hacking your mirror neurons so that you are making a conscious, deliberate choice to mimic the absolute best in the world, choosing to become the exact mathematical average of the legendary, immortal authors you read and the brilliant minds you study, rather than accepting your default fate of becoming the average of the unmotivated, complaining, debt-ridden people who just happen to live on your physical street or work in your physical office building, proving once and for all that your zip code does not dictate your destiny, your mental diet does. Chapter 10. The Compounding of Social Capital. When you finally commit to this grueling process, when you endure the agonizing pain of isolation and immerse yourself in this new virtual neighborhood of excellence, an incredible phenomenon occurs that functions exactly like compound interest in the stock market, because as your mindset shifts, your actions shift, and as your actions shift, your results begin to explode, completely and permanently separating you from the reality of the crab bucket forever. You will slowly but surely start to attract a completely different caliber of human being into your physical life. You will organically meet other isolated, highly ambitious people who are also climbing out of their own buckets, and instead of tearing each other down, you will form a new high-level tribe where the culture is based on growth, extreme accountability, and total ownership. We're talking about investing, cash flow, and self-improvement is the absolute norm, not the weird exception that gets you mocked. This is exactly how you permanently escape the heavy, suffocating gravity of your current financial situation, by realizing that the heavy door to the cage has been wide open this entire time, and that the only thing keeping you inside, chained to a life of mediocrity, is your biological fear of leaving the familiar darkness behind and facing the temporary pain of growth. The crabs will absolutely always be at the bottom of the bucket, fighting over meaningless scraps, arguing over politics, complaining about the economy, and pulling each other down until the end of time. But you have the map, you deeply understand the biological science of your own brain, and you have the exact blueprint from the greatest investor in history to climb out, so you just need the raw, unapologetic courage to leave them behind, endure the loneliness, and finally walk into the blinding light of your own limitless potential. Thank you so much for watching, and if you are truly ready to completely rewire your mind, abandon the herd, and master the true physics of generational wealth, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join the Pratibodh Wisedom community right now, and I will see you in the next one.